You want to expand your fan base. You want to create a legacy. You want to be remembered for not just staying in your country. Go outside of it, expand your horizons, kick butt all over the world. That's what Canelo wants to do.
Welcome to Jabs on Dazn. Sergio, Bernard Hopkins told our own Akin Barak that if Oscar De La Hoya comes back, he wants to see him fight Jermell Charlo. Thoughts?
Ouch. That's the first thing that pops into my head. Ouch. We already know what happened to Oscar De La Hoya in his last fight. He retired on his stool. That's not what we want to see out of Oscar De La Hoya again. Stay retired, stay as a promoter.
Nah, De La Hoya, Canelo, let's squash the beef. We start with Canelo Alvarez, who has still not fought in 2020 and has no fight on the books. According to Golden Boy president Eric Gomez, Alvarez is eager to fight overseas, especially in the UK or Japan. Sergio, should Canelo fight abroad?
Sí, como que no, sí se puede. This is what great fighters do. And the greatest example of that is Muhammad Ali, who fought in like a dozen different countries, 13 if you count Puerto Rico. That's what Anthony Joshua tried to do when he went to MSG and then Saudi Arabia. You want to expand your fan base. You want to create a legacy. You want to be remembered for not just staying in your bubble, in your country. Go outside of it, expand your horizons, kick butt all over the world. That's what Canelo wants to do.
Yeah, I think in the last 2 decades, fighters have been too fixated on fighting in the U.S. and fighting in Las Vegas in particular. Now, I understand that financially, if you're fighting on pay-per-view, fighting in the U.S. makes the most sense, where you can maximize your monetary value. But we forget fighters used to make $10, $15, $20 million fighting abroad. And I think one thing that works in Canelo's favor with his desire to fight overseas is that he is fighting on a platform that is a global platform. I mean, Dazn at some point is going to launch worldwide. And when it does, having Canelo fight in different markets, in different time zones, ones that may not necessarily be the best for the United States, could be good for Dazn. That's why I would expect at some point in 2021 to see Canelo in Japan. Japan is a big market for Dazn, and they have an extremely popular fighter in Ryota Murata, who's a 160-pound former champion. He's got a good name over there. He's got a decent resume. That's a fight that I fully expect Canelo to take at some point next year. I don't think that Murata can beat Canelo, but it could be a great chance for Alvarez to expand that brand into the Asian market, where we have seen so many other athletes capitalize on over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, I believe NBA players have capitalized on going overseas and doing that, and European players as well. And I think a Mexican superstar can do it as well. People love boxing in Japan. I mean, we know what happened when Mike Tyson went out there. I mean, it didn't work out for him, but it was an event. It's something that everybody remembers. Everybody remembers where they were when Mike Tyson got knocked out by Buster Douglas and where it was in Japan. So if Canelo can do the exact same thing that Mike Tyson did, but not get stopped, I think it's great for the sport.
Moving on to Devin Haney, who is reportedly eyeing a return to the ring sometime this fall. According to Eddie Hearn, Haney is considering a fight with Yuri Gamboa sometime in later September or early October. Gamboa is a well-known commodity, but was last seen getting knocked out by Gervonta Davis, a fight in which he suffered a torn ACL. So Sergio, is Gamboa a good opponent for Devin Haney?
Did you say Yuri? Can you repeat after me? Yurokis Gamboa. That's his name, Chris. A gold medalist, a former world champion, a unified world champion. And absolutely it'll be a good name for Devin Haney, because this is exactly what young champions want and need. And history proves this. They always want that name on their resume, that gold medalist, that champion. That's all people remember, whether he's washed or not, whether Gamboa is coming off a knockout loss or not. All you want is that name on your resume. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I'm going to take criticism from a guy that couldn't separate Cheeseman from Eggington this past week. Okay, I do agree that Gamboa is the right fight during this pandemic for Devin Haney. Devin Haney needs a marketable opponent. And I think even though Gamboa got knocked out by Davis, there was a lot of people that wondered why Davis couldn't do it earlier. If it was true that Gamboa was fighting with a torn Achilles from the second round on, that speaks more to his courage And I think it speaks highly of him that he was able to hang in against the top-level opponent like Gervonta Davis. So it's not like Gamboa, despite his advanced age, is this completely washed-up fighter. I think Haney would be a heavy favorite in a fight like that, but sometimes that's not what it's about. It's about getting a big name on your resume, and while these other fighters like Ryan Garcia and Tank Davis and Teofimo Lopez are off doing other things, I think it would be good for Devin Haney to get a name like Gamboa on his resume and then move into 2021 and try to make those bigger fights. And finally, Terence Crawford is undefeated as a pro boxer, but the last man to defeat him as an amateur has recently called him out. Fellow welterweight Ray Robinson has mentioned Crawford repeatedly the last few months, saying Bud only wants the easy fights. Sergio, is this criticism of Crawford fair or foul?
It's foul. It's horrendous. He shouldn't be criticizing arguably the best fighter on the planet. Look, Ray Robinson reminds me of the boxing version of the Mad Rapper in Biggie albums. I know you remember that, Chris. He's always mad at success. The guys at the top, the guys with the shiny jewelry and the fancy cars, and the pound-for-pound best boxers in the world. Ray Robinson has 2 draws and 1 loss in his last 3 fights. Is he a tough Philly fighter? Absolutely. But is he world caliber like Bud Crawford? Absolutely not. I don't know what he's talking about. It's the Mad Rapper or the Mad Boxer, Chris.
Well, to me, it's foul-ish, because while I don't think that Bud Crawford only wants the easy fights, I'm also not convinced he's doing enough to get the big ones. I mean, every time that Crawford is interviewed, it's often why these big fights haven't happened are often redirected at Top Rank, right? Like, why can't these fights happen? The PBC, they can come fight me over here, or I can go over there, but nothing ever really comes of it. I mean, Crawford, as a fighter, I think has more power than he's using. I think Crawford could do more to force these big fights to ultimately happen, and he's not necessarily using it. I think in a way, he's almost complacent when it comes to taking some of these easier fights. Now, I don't think Ray Robinson is a great fighter, but I think you're giving him a little bit too little respect in his last couple of fights. I mean, he went up against Kavaliauskas, who is a top contender, or at least he was up until he lost to Bud Crawford. He had a draw with him. He went up against Josh Kelly, a top prospect, and had a draw with him. So he's fought good opposition in his last 2 fights. He just has not been able to come away with the win. I think Ray Robinson is a decent fight for Bud Crawford, because I don't know who Crawford fights if he wants to fight in 2020. You've got a built-in storyline with Robinson being the last guy to beat Crawford. Robinson's done decent in his last couple of fights. I say make that fight and let the trash talk flow from there.
Chris Mannix, if Canelo Alvarez were to fight a guy with 2 draws and a loss in his last 3 fights, you would be pooping all over this fight. All of a sudden, you're backing up Ray Robinson for Bud Crawford fight? No, man. Bud Crawford deserves the elite, the best of the best. If he can't get these fighters right now because of the pandemic, then look for somebody else, somebody with a winning record, someone that brings something to the table, whether it's a name, a resume, or a fantastic knockout victory in his last fight, but something they could sell, they could promote. You can't promote Ray Robinson other than his namesake, the great Sugar Ray Robinson.
Okay, if not Ray Robinson, who?
I don't know. I'm not a matchmaker and I don't work for Top Rank. I have to deal with you. But I'll tell you one thing, it won't be Ray Robinson.
Okay, but there aren't a lot of contenders out there for Terence Crawford to fight. All the top guys at 147 are booked. Bob Arum has made some noise about making a fight between Crawford and Manny Pacquiao, but if Pacquiao wanted that fight before, wouldn't he have taken it a few years ago when he was still aligned with Top Rank? I don't believe that fight's going to happen, especially with fights in the Middle East not being on the table. That's where some real money could come in as far as a site fee goes. That's not possible, at least not for the rest of this year. It's going to be a lower level fight for Terence Crawford his next time out. At least Ray Robinson, you can sell it a little bit. He's a slick fighter. He's had some good moments against good fighters. He's got the background when it comes to fighting Terence Crawford. Unless you can tell me, Sergio, right now, and I've given you like 2 minutes to think of a name, unless you can tell me someone that's reasonable for Crawford to fight, that's a makeable fight for him, I don't know what the alternative would be.
I don't know the alternative either. I just don't want Bud Crawford to be fighting a fighter that hasn't won in the last 1.5 or 2 years. Is he a good fighter? Ray Robinson is a good B-side. He's a tough Philly fighter, one of these fighters like Hank Lundy and Gabriel Rosado, who are always gonna shed blood and give you everything they have, but they're not A side. They're a good quality B side, but they don't deserve these big fights unless there's a pandemic. So look, during this pandemic, maybe, but I don't like the fight. You can find someone else in the top 10 to actually fight Bud Crawford.
Once again, who?
Give me 3 names. Give me 3 names on the top 5, and I'll give you a name.
You do it. You do it. You were the one saying this fight can't happen. Make the names. And by the way, you talk out of both sides of your mouth. You have spent the last few weeks saying it's okay for Canelo to fight Jay Quigley or Turiano Johnson. Why is it okay for Canelo to fight Quigley or Johnson, but it's not okay for Crawford to fight a guy like Ray Robinson?
Because we're trying to salvage a Mexican Independence Day, and that's September 12th, which is less than 6 weeks away. That's a tradition, a boxing tradition. I'm trying to salvage that. Bud Crawford's not known for fighting in Mexican holidays, so you can actually push that fighter, wait to get a suitable opponent to October, November, maybe even December, but get a suitable fighter that's a good B-side. I don't like Ray Robinson, but if you're trying to sell him, hey, good for you, Mannix.
No, I'm not trying to sell him. I'm simply saying the alternatives just aren't out there. And who cares, by the way, about the Mexican Independence Day? Because we both know that's not going to happen at this point for Canelo Alvarez. These fighters just have to look at the best options on the table right now. And unfortunately for Terence Crawford, most, if not all, of the top options are over on the PBC side of the street. So if Ray Robinson is a makeable, affordable fight, and that second word affordable matters because we know Top Rank's already having problems with making the Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez fight. A guy like Crawford makes even more money than both those two guys, maybe more than both combined on his purses. You've got to look at the economics of it. I think Ray Robinson is an acceptable opponent for an ESPN level fight. And then in 2021, hopefully when this pandemic lifts, you can start talking about making a pay-per-view with Errol Spence. You can start talking even maybe about making a mega fight with Jose Ramirez, who is out there as a potential opponent. Right now, you keep saying make a fight with somebody else. There is nobody else. There is nobody else out there that makes any kind of sense for Terence Crawford. It's not going to be Sean Porter. It's not going to be Errol Spence. It's not going to be Manny Pacquiao. So if it's not any of those fighters, I'm not sure what else is makeable on this side of the aisle.